Sam Bradshaw, SicEm365.com, joins us now. And Sam, we'll talk about Baylor and Texas State. Obviously, you've done a ton of really good in-depth work on the film there, but you spent a lot of time on realignment and television ratings and revenues and all that. How do these new teams help at all if in the television ratings and helping maybe the ACC garner some more revenue from that down the line?
Thanks for having me on. And the new trio probably isn't going to be a big shot in the arm rating-wise. And it's going to be really interesting to see how the contract actually ends up working for that, just because the ACC has so many games that don't even get to a lot of the national platform because they have so much tied up in the ACC network and on the games that are sub-licensed up until recently through Raycom, but now are going to be on the CW for the next few years, and I think ESPN takes them back here in a few years. It's going to be really interesting to see that, but, Stanford and Cal had probably the cushiest setup to generate big ratings in terms of their schedule in the Pac-12 every year, because you had USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington every single year. Nobody else in the conference had that. And yet, despite that, Cal was at the bottom of the television rankings within the conference. They were second or third worst. And then you had Stanford, who had some big years early in the decade, but had been struggling as of late. And, SMU is a solid American Athletic Conference program, and they've got a lot of history going back to the Southwest Conference, but they are not the biggest player in Dallas. They're probably behind a couple Big 12 teams, remaining Big 12 teams in that regard, probably all three of them. It's not something where these guys are going to come in and give you just a ton of high-level TV ratings. This seems like a long-term, hey, if we drop below 14 full members, ESPN can renegotiate the deal on us. Let's add some members while we can so that should we lose 3, we're still good. Or if we lose people in the future, we could potentially add people back as we lose people and keep the deal going.
So ultimately, television-wise, it's not gonna move the needle.
I don't think it'll move the needle. I mean, don't get me wrong; these programs bring a decent amount of value. You get access to the Dallas-Fort Worth television market and the San Francisco Bay Area television market, and there's a lot of TV sets in those markets. Now, Dallas-Fort Worth, Dallas County is probably one of the lighter as a percentage of the population that likes college football. It's one of the lighter percentage counties in Texas, but you're also getting Tarrant. You're also getting Denton County. You're also getting a lot of those. And, and then the state of California as a whole is not very crazy about college football, but there's a lot of TV sets there. So you're getting at least some bit of a market that you could potentially realize if the team can have a big enough year to draw in a bunch of casual eyeballs. And then you're also getting one piece of inventory. If they continue it, it might just get folded into the ACC scheduling agreement with Notre Dame. But if Stanford can keep their game with Notre Dame separate and just have that as the continuing annual game they have with the Irish, that would be a big inventory item every other year that would help the conference with their inventory with ESPN.
So how do you think, just your opinion long-term, how does this work out for the ACC, especially if they can't keep 3 of their members that voted against it and the 3 pretty big ones happy?
Well, long-term, whenever this deal's up and it's time to negotiate the next one, you will want to have those members with you. They're the ones that are the difference between, that's the difference between conferences that are getting in the 40 to 60 million range right now and the conferences that are getting in the low 30s, in television revenue. Big brands that everybody identifies that can really draw the eyeballs, like a Florida State, like a Clemson. Those are the ones that they have to keep happy. And if they don't, it'll be a markedly less desirable contract for the TV partners to land. I do think they have strength in numbers, and I think that was a good portion of why they did this move. These were 3 schools that the presidents were content to add that give you a little bit of a buffer should you run into some rusties ahead, because just because it makes them happier not to add them doesn't necessarily mean they were going to stay anyway. I view it very similar to the situation the Big 12 had in 2016, where Texas may not have wanted to expand, but had the Big 12 added Cincinnati and BYU and UCF back then, I think Texas probably would have kiboshed the Houston edition, even though the same principle goes for Houston. If you'd added them back then, you're not on the edge of your seat wondering if your conference is going to collapse in 2021. You're just wondering how many others might go out the door, but you'd have strength in numbers. And I think the ACC is kind of taking the alternate route here, where they know they've got a pro rata clause from their TV partner, and they're going to use it to ensure that whatever the ACC is, at least a form of it stays together, which is more than the Pac-12 can say right now.
Sam, so are you going to try to Venn diagram all this and project out? I mean, you've done really good at kind of weeding out the really good. You've been great, excellent at it. Weeding out the nonsense when it came to TV numbers and getting down to like, here's what people are really watching. Do you try to Venn diagram this and put it all together to project it out? How do you do that to try to make it sense projecting what the ACC could look like ratings wise down the line?
Well, first off, we got to understand exactly where all this excess inventory that they're getting from 3 schools worth of home games is going to go. They've got a contract with ABC ESPN where they effectively own everything, and they take a certain percentage of the inventory to partner on the ACC network, and then they sub-license a certain percentage of that inventory to Raycom. So only I think 30 to 35 games of the ACC content made it to ABC, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPNU. So does that go up, or are some of these going to have to be earmarked for the ACC network in order to fight for carriage right negotiations, or are they legally bound there? What kind of deal constraints are you going to be limited by? That's the first question I have. I do think this gets a little bit more exposure for the ACC, because once you reach a critical point of inventory on the ACC network, it makes more sense for ESPN to push it elsewhere. But is that elsewhere more games on national broadcast, or is that elsewhere ESPN Plus, where they currently don't make ACC teams subscribe for that, and all of a sudden they now have 17 or however many games to play with to potentially do that for their business model.
All right, Sam, Baylor versus Texas State tomorrow. You've broken down the film on this game. Baylor's, but is it a little challenging to do that or a breakdown of what you've seen? Because Texas State's all new. Baylor's going to have a ton of new players, most of whom didn't see a lot of time last year. What kind of challenge was that to work out the strengths and weaknesses of this game?
It's always a bit of a challenge, and Texas State for the last 3 years has been one of the more transfer portal heavy teams. And Kenny's doing it out of necessity this year because of how transfer portal reliant Spavital had been. He has to get somebody in there to play this year, but he's going to try and build the program with high school guys on subsequent classes. And, you really go and you study Incarnate Word, because if you're bringing the same coordinators, chances are the basic framework of what they're going to do is going to be very, very similar to what they did at Incarnate Word. And defensively, it's a 4-2-5. They're smaller, faster defenders. They like to play a lot of man coverage last year. Whether they do that with the new guys they got is anyone's guess. They've got to be able to put their guys in position to be successful. And if you don't have guys that can man cover, you got to abandon it, but they may have it. I'm not quite familiar with all the new guys they brought in that regard. But where they really get interesting to study is their offense. You've got some of the wider wide receiver splits that you saw from the Briles era Baylor teams, and you've got some of the RPOs they have, but their screen game and some of their play design is absolutely nasty. It's going to be a week where Baylor guys are going to have to be in the film room and be very aware of what might be coming, because they like to go up tempo. They like to show you a lot of different things. They use a lot of motion. They use quarterback run game. They use deep option routes that the run and shoot was predicated on, that you also saw used during the Briles years. But you also see a lot of West Coast concepts. So things like 3-man snag, double slants, mesh sit. You've got Y over. You've got a lot of different concepts that are a little bit more ball control passing. So it's not just one thing, and that screen game is absolutely nasty. They have some screens that are very, very well designed that look exactly like their base run plays to begin with. And it's not, we have receivers blocking for each other on a run play. This looks like a run play, and the guys you thought were blocking at the line are going out to get your DBs.
Do you think that Baylor should be able to control the clock on them pretty well?
I think Baylor's offense is going to have a great amount of success being able to move the ball on these guys. Clock control will really depend on what kind of style of play they make you go with. If they're constantly blitzing you and daring single coverage, you'll have a productive offense, but it may not take that much time. Just with potential for big plays or incompletions getting you off the field and intermittently having that. But if they kind of sit back and play you honest, I think Baylor will be able to run the ball consistently. I think Baylor will be able to milk that clock on them. It's the other side of the ball where you've got some speedy weapons at running back and receiver, and you've also got a guy that's got RG3 kind of speed at quarterback and Malik Hornsby. He's one of the two options they might go with. He's an Arkansas transfer, and they've got Auburn transfer TJ Finley, who's a big guy. Kind of reminds me of Jamarcus Russell in the sense that he's a big guy, but he's an athletic big guy. I mean, he's not going to win any 100-meter races for you, but he's enough to be a viable runner. Those two guys and the scheme they've got, that's where it really comes down to for this game, in my opinion. Baylor's missing their top nose tackle after graduating their top 3 from last year. How well do you hold up on the defensive interior? Facing this team is going to be very different if you can stuff their running game playing shorthanded in the box versus if you have to add an extra guy in there. If they can get running on you at tempo, this offense becomes a whole other can of worms.
Sam Bradshaw, S11 on the site, does a lot of great work for us when it comes to TV ratings, when it comes to breaking down film. So if you're a SicEm365.com subscriber, you already know that. If you're not, and you want to read Sam's stuff, SicEm365.com. Always great stuff. Sam, thanks for hopping on today. I'll talk to you next Friday.
Yeah, sounds good, Paul. Thank you.
There we go. Sam Bradshaw, S11. When we come back, Grayson Grunhafer, SicEm365.com recruiting analyst,